If only 5 minutes could decide the fate of an empire, what would history look like? At 10:25 in the morning, on June 4, 1942, flames swallowed 3 Japanese carriers. Sailors leapt into burning seas. Just days earlier, Tokyo believed America was weak, slow, and broken. But in a small, windowless basement on Oahu, men with pencils and codebooks had cracked Japan's proudest secret. They knew Midway was the target, they knew the trap, and they were ready. Victory disease had blinded Japan, but clarity, courage, and sacrifice were about to rewrite the story of the war. That is how 5 minutes reshaped the world in the middle of WW2. In those months, Japan looked unstoppable. From Singapore to Burma, its flag flew high. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, warned his nation that America's factories could turn rivers into conveyor belts. Yet his words were drowned by triumph. Now, Japan prepared to strike Midway, a coral speck guarding the path to Hawaii. Tokyo saw it as a final blow to force peace on its terms. The United States saw it as a chance to fight back. The stage was set for the most decisive battle in the Pacific. In the spring of 1942, Japan stood at the height of its power. In just 6 months, its forces had conquered Singapore, swept through the Philippines, seized the Dutch East Indies, and pushed across Burma. To the outside world, the empire seemed invincible. Newspapers in Tokyo spoke of destiny. Generals and admirals convinced themselves that the tide of victory would never turn. Inside the Naval High Command, a dangerous idea took root. They called it victory disease. It was the arrogance of endless success, the habit of mistaking momentum for inevitability. Commanders such as Minoru Genda, the architect of Pearl Harbor, declared that the United States lacked the spirit to fight a long sea war. Critics who warned of danger were dismissed as weak. Dissent became a defect, not a warning. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had studied at Harvard and served in Washington, knew better. He had warned his superiors that he could run wild for 6 months, but after that, he had no confidence. By May, those 6 months were already over, yet the pressure inside Tokyo was feverish. Operations Chief Matome Ugaki and others pressed for one more decisive strike, one blow so crushing that America would be forced to negotiate. Midway, a small coral atoll in the Pacific, became the chosen target. In their minds, the plan was perfect. On paper, the enemy had only 2 carriers left. Yorktown, heavily damaged at the Coral Sea, was believed to be out for months. Japan saw only weakness. What it did not see was how quickly America could rise. Across the ocean, in a windowless basement at Pearl Harbor, a different kind of battle unfolded. The place was known as Station Hypo. Commander Joseph Rochefort and his small team lived among endless strips of intercepted messages, scribbled notes, and frequency charts. Their task was not glamorous, but it was decisive. They were piecing together fragments of Japan's naval code, JN-25. The Japanese believed their cipher was secure. But day by day, word by word, Hypo cracked enough to see the shape of an operation. Messages spoke of a target only referred to as AF. In Washington, some feared AF meant Hawaii, or even the West Coast. Rochefort disagreed. He was convinced AF meant Midway. He needed proof strong enough to silence every skeptic. His idea was simple and daring. Midway was instructed, over open radio, to report a failure in its desalination system, a shortage of fresh water. Days later, a Japanese message was intercepted. It reported that AF is short of water. That single phrase shattered the fog. AF was Midway. With the operation exposed, Admiral Chester Nimitz made his move. He ordered Enterprise and Hornet to sail, and rushed Yorktown out of dry dock after only 3 days of miraculous repairs. Carriers were sent to a square of ocean northeast of Midway, a place Nimitz named Point Luck. There, hidden from view, they would wait. Japan believed it was setting a trap. In truth, America had read the script and moved the stage. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, the United States would not only respond to an attack, it would lie in wait to strike first. Before dawn on June 4th, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo gave the order. 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu turned into the wind. 108 aircraft roared into the sky, bound for Midway. Their mission was simple: crush the island's air power, then prepare for invasion. At 6:30, bombs rained down on Midway's runways and fuel stores. Hangars burned, but the defenders fought back. Marine pilots and outdated fighters clawed into the sky, and anti-aircraft gunners filled the air with black bursts of fire. Midway was battered, but it did not die. The airfield still breathed. The strike leader radioed back a simple message: Midway requires another attack. That single report collided with Nagumo's carefully scripted plan. His reserve aircraft were already armed with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs, ready to strike enemy ships if they appeared. To hit Midway again, crews would have to strip off the naval ordnance, haul up land bombs, and refuel everything. Nagumo faced a brutal choice: keep the reserve armed for ships and risk leaving Midway alive, or rearm for land attack and risk being caught with hangars filled with gasoline vapors, bombs on carts, and returning planes circling low on fuel. He chose the second option. Below deck, chaos took over. Bomb carts screeched, fuel hoses snaked across hangar floors. Crews wrestled with half-changed loads as the first wave of planes began to return, desperate to land. Japanese doctrine demanded clean decks for recovery, so elevators jammed with weapons while the skies filled with tired pilots running out of fuel. Then came another blow. A scout plane, delayed at takeoff, finally reported sighting American ships and a carrier among them. Orders were reversed yet again. Torpedoes had to be brought back up. Bombs had to be dragged below. The decks became a trap of steel, fuel, and explosives. Nagumo's fleet, designed for precision, was suddenly drowning in confusion. In a carrier war, minutes were everything. Now, minutes were slipping away. At 9:20 in the morning, the 1st American Torpedo Squadron found the enemy. They came in low and slow, flying obsolete TBD Devastators. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron of Torpedo Squadron 8, from the carrier Hornet, had told his men before takeoff: even if only one plane survived, it must still attack. Over the blue waters near Midway, that promise became reality. The Japanese combat air patrol of Zero fighters dove like hawks. Cannon fire ripped through fragile wings. Devastators burst into flames or cartwheeled into the sea. One by one, the planes were destroyed. When it was over, every aircraft was gone. Only Ensign George Gay floated in the water to tell the story. Soon after, torpedo squadrons from Enterprise and Yorktown arrived. They too pressed in against impossible odds. Anti-aircraft guns thundered. Carriers twisted violently to avoid torpedo wakes. The Devastators kept boring in, but their weapons either missed or were easily dodged. Nearly every pilot was lost. From the Japanese bridges, it looked like a clean victory. The enemy had been reckless, and they had been punished. But appearances lied. Those doomed torpedo runs had dragged the Japanese fighters down to sea level. They had burned fuel, scattered into pursuit, and left the skies above thinly defended. It was a sacrifice measured not in hits, but in time. By pulling the Zeros down and forcing the carriers into evasive maneuvers, the torpedo squadrons had opened a window. That window would only last minutes, but those minutes would change the war. High above the Pacific, Commander Wade McCluskey of the Enterprise faced a decision. His fuel was nearly gone. He could turn back or gamble. Then he spotted a lone Japanese destroyer racing at full speed. McCluskey followed its wake, and the gamble paid off. Out of the haze, the Japanese carriers appeared below, spread across the ocean like targets on a range. At 10:20, McCluskey gave the signal. Dozens of SBD Dauntless dive bombers rolled over into steep plunges. Sunlight flashed on wings as they screamed downward. Below, the Japanese fleet was in disarray, fighters dragged low by torpedo attacks. Decks crowded with fueled and armed planes. Hangars crammed with bombs and gasoline vapors. Kaga was the first to suffer. Bombs smashed through her decks, erupting into firestorms that swept through aircraft lined wingtip to wingtip. Moments later, Akagi was hit by a single, perfectly placed bomb that set off secondary explosions. Then Soryu was struck, her forward hangar igniting in an instant inferno. In the span of 5 minutes, 3 proud carriers, the same ships that had struck Pearl Harbor, were mortally wounded. From the bridges of those ships, disbelief turned to horror. The ocean boiled with smoke and fire. For Japan, the decisive battle they had sought was collapsing before their eyes. For America, those 5 minutes became the turning point of WW2. Among the smoke and chaos, one Japanese carrier still lived. Hiryu, under Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi, prepared her planes for a desperate counterstrike. There was no time for mourning. Orders were sharp and urgent. Crews fueled dive bombers and torpedo planes, pushing them onto the deck. Yamaguchi's resolve was unshaken. If there was even a chance to hit back, he would take it. Just after noon, Hiryu's first strike group found the Yorktown. Bombs tore through her decks, setting fires and filling compartments with smoke. For a moment, it seemed the American carrier was doomed. But damage control parties worked with astonishing speed. Within an hour, Yorktown was steaming again, patched and fighting. Yamaguchi launched a second wave, this time torpedo planes. They broke through the American screen and struck true. 2 torpedoes slammed into Yorktown's side, flooding compartments and cutting her power. By late afternoon, the order was given to abandon ship. Yorktown had survived Coral Sea, but now she was mortally wounded. Even so, the reprieve was brief for Hiryu. American scouts had already fixed her position. Dauntless bombers from Enterprise dove through the clouds and struck. Explosions ripped through her decks. Fires raged unchecked. Yamaguchi refused evacuation, choosing to die with his ship and her captain. By nightfall, Hiryu was finished. Japan had entered the day with 4 carriers. By sunset, all 4 were gone. When dawn broke on June 5th, the Pacific was no longer the same ocean. 4 Japanese fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, lay at the bottom, along with more than 300 aircraft and many of Japan's best aviators. What had taken years to build was gone in a single day. The loss was more than steel. Japan's naval air arm had been forged over decades, selecting only the most skilled men and training them through years of grueling preparation. That system produced elite pilots, but it could not replace them quickly. At Midway, a generation of veterans was erased. For the United States, the cost was real but bearable. Yorktown was lost, yet Enterprise and Hornet sailed home. American shipyards and factories were already working at a speed Japan could not match. Every month, new carriers and planes rolled off assembly lines. Every month, fresh pilots graduated from training schools in numbers that dwarfed Japan's output. Strategically, the initiative shifted. Japan could no longer plan grand offensives. Instead, it faced the grim task of defending an empire stretched across the Pacific. The United States, once on the defensive, now had freedom to choose where and when to strike. 2 months later, Marines landed on Guadalcanal, beginning a relentless campaign that would grind Japan down. Midway was not the end of the war, but it was the end of Japan's hope for a quick victory. From that day forward, time itself became America's ally and Japan's enemy. The Battle of Midway was more than a clash of fleets. It was a lesson written in fire, steel, and sacrifice. In just 5 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were lost. By nightfall, a 4th had joined them. An empire that believed victory was a habit discovered that history keeps its own clock. Midway revealed 3 truths. First, arrogance can blind even the strongest nation. Second, in carrier war, minutes matter more than months. Third, ships can be rebuilt, but a generation of elite aviators cannot. These truths changed the course of Chien Tranthe J. Lun II. From that day, the initiative passed to the United States. 2 months later, Guadalcanal tested America's endurance. 2 years later, in the Marianas, new Essex-class carriers unleashed waves of trained pilots against green Japanese rookies. And by 1945, the empire that had once struck Pearl Harbor faced ruin. Midway stands as one of the decisive moments of World War II. It proved that intelligence could be as deadly as bombs. It showed that courage, even in defeat, could open the door to victory. And it reminded the world that in World War II, as in every war, the greatest weapon was not steel or fire, but the human spirit. Today, as we look back, we hear Midway's quiet echo, a warning against pride, a call for humility, and a reminder that the peace we enjoy was bought at a terrible price. The story of Midway is not only a chapter in World War II, it is a lesson for every generation.